जयति पराशरसूनुः सत्यवती हृदयनन्दनो व्यासः यस्य आस्य कमलगलितं वाङ्मयममृतं जगत्पिबति भुजगभोगाभमुद्यम्य हृद्यं निजभुजं दक्षिणं लक्षणाढ्यं ललितमुद्रिक्तविज्ञानमुद्रं भज भज अनन्तमित्यालपन्तं प्रणतवान् प्राणिनां प्राणभूतं प्रणतिभिः प्रीणये पूर्णबोधम् भवदवोष्णेन ततप्यमानान् भुवि परं नाथमप्रेक्षमाणान् भुवनमन्येन च अन्येन दोष्णा भवतु भीर्मा इति नः सान्त्वयन्तं प्रणतवान् प्राणिनां प्राणभूतं प्रणतिभिः प्रीणये पूर्णबोधम्
यदेव विद्यया करोति श्रद्धया उपनिषदा तदेव वीर्यवत्तमं भवति. In the last talk, I mentioned being aware of what we do. Now let us make a beginning in learning to be conscious. Rig Samhitha mantra has been uttered since morning by the Rutvikas. Each mantra has a different offering. To be precise, it is around 10,552 mantras recited for the past 8 days. There are about 80 Valakilya Sutra mantras. Without the Valakilya Sutra mantras, the total comes to 10,472 mantras. 1,028 suktas. If we minus Valakilya, then it is 1017 suktas. 10,552 ruks or mantras or hymns, as we say in English. It is easier to understand hymns than mantras or ruks. Our language is alien to us. So this is the volume of mantras to be chanted for the next 8 days. The vibrations of the chanting will fill up this place. We live in a world filled with the smog of gasoline in the air. Ironically, with the polluting smog in Mumbai, there will be chanting of the mantras. I suspect the pollution of sound along with the air we breathe. Let us test if chanting will purify the pollution or if the mantras get polluted due to the contamination. Such is the level of pollution here. For example, it is like pouring polluted water into Ganga. Will the water of Ganga purify the polluted water, or will the murky water pollute Ganga? Air, sound, and the entire atmosphere is spoiled in Mumbai beyond repair. We now live in what we call Vishakriminyaya, amidst the pollution. We are now attempting to purify the polluted atmosphere through the vibrations of sounds. In addition, Agni, god of fire, get offerings. UL Acharya and BPL Rao have conveniently transferred their responsibility to me to answer the queries for the next 7 days. I will certainly fulfill my responsibility. I will clarify why we must perform yaga in our Gnana Yagna in the evening. You may have noticed how the Puranas open up. It begins by performing yagna. The rishis performed yagna and yagas at the ashramas early in the morning. There would be talks on Puranas in the same evening in the same venue. So, Dravya Yagna in the morning and Gnana Yagna in the evening were observed consistently. Why should we do the same now? We must know why the rishis were performing the yajna. Should we perform yajna in modern times is another debate. Let us discuss why our ancestors were engaged in conducting yajna often. They were not fools to perform something believed to be meaningless in the present. What was the intent then? What was the concept behind yajna? Gnana Yajna is being organized all 8 days in the evening to understand the reason behind the performance of yajnas. We comprehend the true meaning of Dravya Yajna only if Gnana Yajna accompanies it. We must know the intent of the yajna. Yadeva vidyaya karoti shraddhaya upanishada tadeva viryavattaram bhavati. We have lost interest in such matters because we do not know about it. Eventually, yajna's performance continued without dispersing its meaning to the public. We reached a stage where people who performed were ignorant, reducing it to a chore. Explanations on how and why behind the yajna were absent. The organizers lost interest because those who performed it did not know why and what they were doing. Despite the explanation of the intent, there is no patience to elucidate the gist in its entirety. I heard 2 acquaintances from my own town talking to each other yesterday. We explained to the devotees the objective and the manner behind the yajna. Therefore, devotees were aware of the rationale. They felt that the explanation of the intent behind the rituals helped them to appreciate our culture. If we had not done this, they would have left without understanding the chanting of Purohits in Sanskrit. They confessed that we criticize anything and everything without ascertaining the facts. When we all know what we are doing, it is very satisfying to the organizers, performers, and onlookers. The responsibility of explaining the intent of the yajna was lost years ago. Therefore, a sense of lackadaisical attitude towards our ancient wisdom developed. Fathoming the Vedas is not possible is a common belief. Memorization of the Vedas was the only way. The common belief was that Vedas had no meaning. I have heard such opinions from all quarters several times. Forget about the common person. Even the learned ones have told the name Anarthaka. The great learned sage Yasaka mentions this, and he lived around 2500 years ago. There was another sage called Katakya. He says that chanting of the Vedas is to earn boons. The confusion about the meaning of Vedas began 2500 years ago. Whose fault is it if the public did not understand the Vedas? Asked the great scholar Yaska. A blind person enters a gazebo and a pillar is in the front. He bangs himself on the pillar. So whose fault is it? The pillars or the blind person's? Can we hold the Vedas at fault because we cannot understand them? Naishasthano aparadaha yadenam andho apashyati, says Yaska. Yaska has presented this interesting metaphor to us. If the blind cannot see the pillar, it is not the fault of the pillar. Yaska explains further that he can understand the Vedas. We must attempt to know the unknown. Such arguments persist even now. I remember an incident where I wrote a footnote on vowels regarding translations of Vedas. There was no practice of explaining vowels in the footnote before. You heard two kinds of chanting a little while ago. The scholars from Gokarna chant Rigveda in a particular way. The scholars from Mumbai also chanted Yajurveda and the Taittiriya Upanishad. The Gokarna scholars were closer to the Maharashtra scholars in the chanting rhythm. The scholars from Karnataka do not chant like the Maharashtra scholars. In Karnataka, scholars of Gokarna chant differently than the rest of the state. The rhythm in Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, and Andhra Pradesh are all similar. In Kerala, it is very different compared to the other southern states. The scholars of Kerala argue that their version is the right one. There's a lot of vibration in the manner they chant. In North India, one cannot comprehend what language they are reciting. Is it in Sanskrit or Hindi? I mentioned how the priests in Kashi temple recite in my earlier talk. Vane Kashi Gune Ganga Bhavani Me Nikhanika. God knows what language this is. The correct version is Vande Kashim Guham Ganga Bhavani Manikarnika. I wonder if the gods would follow this version. I did not understand the chanting in the Kashi temple. It took me half an hour to realize that the chanting was in Sanskrit and not in Hindi. Veda also is chanted similarly in the north of India. When the text is out of context, pronunciation does not matter. So there are different pronunciations in different parts of the country. Samaveda's chanting is very different. Scholar Vidya Simhacharya mentioned Kautuma. There are three prevalent ways of chanting the Samaveda: Ranayaniya, Jaimaniya, and Kautuma, which will be explained shortly. There was a mention of Atharva Veda. I will discuss all four Vedas and their differences, and I will attempt to explain the contents in detail in the coming days. To sum up, there is a colossal ignorance of Vedic literature. More importantly, we have a lot of assumptions formed without understanding the Vedic literature.